Now, what were you doing before this company was formed?
He was starving.
Now, wait a minute.
No. It's a fact. Sure, he designed all this stuff, but he didn't know beans about what to do with it. He was fooling around in somebody's garage, making like an inventor, and starving. Hadn't it been for me, he'd still be in somebody else's garage.
And how about you? What big deals were you cooking up till you had my designs to merchandise?
This is Talk Back. Our drama for this program is called The Middle of the River. Our guest is Dr. Douglas Jackson, Professor of Social Ethics, Perkins School of Theology. Later, Miss Lisa Sergio and Mr. Merle Emery will be asking Dr. Jackson questions raised by our play.
Good morning, the Jones Vale Company. Thank you.
Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
I have an appointment with Mr. Jones and Mr. Vale.
Not together.
I'm afraid so. My name's Carson.
Well, I guess we can try. Mr. Jones, Mr. Carson is here to see you and Mr. Vale. I'll tell him. So far, so good. Mr. Vale, Mr. Carson is here for his meeting with you, and... Oh. Well, he said it was to be in his office.
Ask him to hold on a moment.
Just a minute.
Isn't there an office that's vacant right now? Neutral ground?
How about the conference room?
That's fine. Which way is it?
End of the hall. But shouldn't I check first and make sure that they...
No. Just tell them both that that's where I'll be.
Mr. Carson?
That's right.
I'm Carl Jones.
I'm glad to know you. And this, I expect, would be Mr. Vale.
Right. Well, why didn't Merriman come himself? Couldn't he face the music?
Well, since he's attorney for your firm, he didn't want to be in the position of maybe having to take sides.
Oh, but it's all right for you, huh? As a stranger to take sides, is that it?
No. But since you are both, as you say, strangers to me, I might be in a position to help you mediate your dispute. Or is that too strong a word?
Hardly strong enough, I'd say.
Mr. Carson, are you an attorney too?
Yes.
Then you understand this isn't an official arbitration. I hope it's quite clear I don't intend to accept anything I don't like.
Quite clear. This is purely informal. Nothing that we decide upon here will be binding unless you both want it to be. Fair enough? Well, now, let me see if I have the background facts firmly in mind. Gentlemen, why don't we all sit down? Now, as I understand it, the equipment that you manufacture here was originally designed by you. And the patents on those designs are owned by the firm.
That's right. I designed the equipment, but we own the patents. One of my less brilliant moves.
When did you ever make a brilliant move?
So you, Mr. Jones, design the equipment, and you, Mr. Vale, are in charge of marketing it. That seems to be a classic business pattern. An inside man and an outside man, both equal partners. Now, just for my own information, would you like to tell me a little about your previous activities? I'll start with you, Mr. Jones. Wouldn't you be more comfortable sitting down? As you wish. Now, what were you doing before this company was formed?
He was starving.
Now, wait a minute.
No. It's a fact. Sure, he designed all this stuff, but he didn't know beans about what to do with it. He was fooling around in somebody's garage, making like an inventor, and starving. Hadn't it been for me, he'd still be in somebody else's garage.
And how about you? What big deals were you cooking up till you had my designs to merchandise?
Look, I gave up a good job to form this company. You had nothing to give up. You were already on the bottom.
Oh, you made a great sacrifice. You gave up $7,000 a year to get 40. You know, a salesman is only as good as his product.
Don't you start believing the sales pitch I give to our customers.
Gentlemen, this is not going to solve your problem. Let's all be seated. 6 years ago, you started out with just the two of you and one secretary. How many employees do you have now?
90.
But that's remarkable.
Oh, sure. We have 90 people here. 12 work with me and 78 with him. How's that for a balanced organization?
But where should the emphasis be? We're manufacturers, not con men.
All right, Carl. It's pretty clear what you think of me. I don't think there's anything more to discuss here.
Mr. Vail, I'm sure Mr. Jones only meant that it takes a lot of people to make an honest product.
Well, whatever he meant, let's keep personalities out of this.
I'm interested only in the company, not in personalities. Now look, Carson, the point is this. We know that our biggest competitor is about to come out with some equipment very much like our own. Now, it's no secret. They've announced it to the trade. And this is a real threat. But at this point, Mr. Vail and I are in complete disagreement as to how to meet this threat.
Why don't you both tell me what you have in mind?
Well, in a nutshell, I think we ought to take our capital reserve and use it to expand our sales force. Now, we're only selling in 14 states right now. If we move fast, we can be in 20 more states before our competitor even has his equipment ready to be shown.
You don't agree, I take it.
I certainly don't. The only reason this company is successful is because we were ahead of everybody else in our designs. And that's the only approach that can meet this threat now. I say we take our reserves and throw it into expanded research. Look, we have some marvelous designs in the making right now. With our new plans, we can make our competitors look obsolete before they're even on the market.
Fine. And when will your designs be ready?
Alex, haven't you learned anything about research in 6 years? You know you can't put a date on these things. That would be using the calendar as a straitjacket. My lab people and I need time to think.
Sure, go ahead. You hide away in your ivory tower and think, while you know who moves into the market and takes it right away from us.
So, that's how it is.
Yeah, that's where the body is buried.
Mr. Merriman tells me that each of you owns 50% of this company. So I suppose that means when it comes to any major expenditure, you both have to okay it.
Mm-hmm. Around here, we call it Operation Stalemate.
All right, how about this? Obviously, in this difficult period, your firm needs only one hand at the helm, not two, since you don't agree.
Sure. But which one?
Take turns.
What? You mean me on Monday, him on Tuesday?
No, of course not. But what about if one of you surrenders to the other 1% of his holdings?
What? Ridiculous.
Now, wait a minute and hear me out. One of you gives up the 1% that controls the firm for a specified, limited period of time, say 1 year. With the understanding, mind you, spelled out in the contract, that at the end of that year, control goes to the other for a similar period of time. Well, in 2 years, things may have changed and you can review the situation.
You can't be serious.
It couldn't possibly work.
Well, I may as well learn something here. Why not?
Well, for one thing, how do we arrive at who takes control first? Flip a coin?
It's been done.
It's unthinkable.
Suppose Mr. Vail agreed to let you take the first year.
Why don't you ask me? I say the time to expand our sales staff is now. Right now. I've said it over and over again.
Look, you can say it 1,000 times. It won't make any more sense than the first time.
Well, enough of that. Any more ideas, Mr. Carson?
I hate to suggest this, but would either of you be interested in buying out the other?
I would. Me?
Oh, you've considered this?
Of course we have. I'd buy him out in a minute. He won't sell.
And you, Mr. Jones?
Likewise.
You mean you'd be willing to buy two, but...
That's right. Likewise.
Looks like we slammed the door on that one. All right, gentlemen, there are any number of other suggestions that I could make. But seeing the frame of mind that you're both in at the moment, I don't think any of them would work. Inasmuch as they all depend on, well, some compromise by each of you. Looking over your records, it's pretty clear to me as an outsider that the one word behind your remarkable success is the word harmony. By working together, by teamwork, you started from scratch and really accomplished something. Now, I know that teamwork is a much abused word these days, but the fact remains that that's the secret of this firm. And teamwork means compromise. At this moment, you may seem miles apart, but I tell you, two men who've come this far together can surely go the whole way. After all, gentlemen, the currents may be strongest, roughest, in the middle of the river, but you're both swimming in the same direction. It's just a matter of goodwill, of simple give and take. Well, what do you say? Is compromise the way or not?
Mr. Carson, let me ask you something.
Yes, sir.
Suppose, just suppose now, I offered to yield control for a year. Would that be a compromise?
Of course.
On the other hand, if my partner offered to yield control for a year, that would be a compromise too, wouldn't it?
Well, I've already said that, but I don't understand.
Mr. Carson, which, in your opinion, would be the better compromise?
I don't know what you mean by better. Better for whom?
Which would be better for the firm? I think that's what he means.
That's precisely what I mean. Well, Mr. Carson?
I can't answer that. It's not my job to answer that kind of question.
But, you know the facts here. Surely you have some opinion.
Mr. Jones, I was asked by your attorney to see if I might mediate a disagreement here. It's not my job to have opinions on what is a purely internal matter.
But you surely must have some convictions on the nature of compromise itself. Or is it just a matter of pouring oil on troubled waters? Anything, just let's not have friction. Is that it?
Don't knock it, Mr. Jones. It's friction that's destroying your firm right now. Or conversely, it's harmony and compromise that make the world go round.
Compromise? By whom? Compromise what? Toward what end? And for what reason?
You know, it may not be your job to have convictions on what's best for this firm, but it is ours. Do you see any reason to detain Mr. Carson any longer?
Nope.
I agree. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good day.
Good day.
You know, that's the first thing we've agreed on in weeks. You mean disposing of Mr. Carson? Can you imagine? Be nice, boys. Don't fight. Peace at any price. And he's not even embarrassed.
Yeah. You know, Zubin, he's right about one thing, though. It's either compromise or ruin.
But it depends on what we mean by compromise.
Dr. Jackson, just what do you mean by compromise?
Compromise is, in its largest context, arriving at an agreement when there are differences in points of view. I tend to mean by compromise arriving at the element of truth from each of the conflicting positions so that a greater truth is arrived at than is embodied in either of the conflicting positions.
Dr. Jackson, that's a wonderful definition, but the word compromise in general has acquired a much worse meaning than that.
You're quite correct. Words do tend to take on inflections and special meanings from use. And I imagine that Henry Clay would not be looked upon as a great statesman today, although in the day in which he worked out the great compromise, this was regarded as a crowning work.
Wouldn't it have been a conciliator, really, the term?
A conciliator seeks to work out an agreement chiefly for the purpose of bringing peace or agreement. Compromise is something larger than this, in the sense in which I embody it. Compromise is not just concerned with agreement, it's concerned with using disagreement to arrive at a larger truth and respect for the truth that is contained in the disagreeing positions.
You say nothing about give or take here. Is this in your definition?
Well, what I would like to have is that you take the truth that is in the opposite position, and what you give away is the error in your own position, so that you're arriving at a position that includes more truth and has less error.
These people, whose problem we've just seen displayed here, they had a common interest already.
That's right.
Because they both wanted the best for that firm. Now, the compromise there was as to which was the best way of arriving at it. When you really are confronted with a serious compromise, almost always you don't even have the common goal. What happens then?
The common goal is probably there, but not recognized. Nearly everyone in society that will come in conflict with each other has a great mass of beliefs and ideas that he's built his life upon, that the whole culture is built upon, that he doesn't talk about, but they underlie what he's doing.
I don't agree with you. May I disagree with you?
Go right ahead.
I think that we have an idea of what we think are the values of our culture. But I think we see them in a light in which they suit us best from where we sit at the moment.
Oh, I'd agree to this. It's just that I feel that there is, underneath even this, though, a recognition that there are certain things that are basic. Perhaps we include this in the word God or patriotism, but we tend to define God differently, or we tend to define patriotism differently.
Then we need a compromise to arrive at the same definition if we're going to act together. Is that what you mean?
This is an important thing, and someone has said that the convocations of philosophers spend nearly all their time worrying about definitions. And this can be a good or a bad thing. For the outsider, it may seem a bad thing. For a person that is very much concerned with finding the truth, this is probably the place to start, to worry about the definition.
Would you say that compromise is a necessary tool for effective group living?
Provided there is any tension or disagreement within the group, it is necessary. And this is based upon the idea that no one person has all the truth, and that no one person can't be taught by any other member in the group.
Then if you agree, as you do, that there's a great deal of give and take, that is a surrender of certain views and the acceptance of certain other views to arrive at a common interest, which is the point beyond which you make no surrender? There is a point in the scale of values, surely, beyond which you do not compromise.
That's always the very difficult point to arrive at, is what is it that is ultimate? What is it that I must hold to absolutely with no grounds of change at all? For me, the answer is that I must continue to hold to my ultimate goals. I can compromise on techniques, on strategy, on tactics. But in terms of my ultimate goals and the source of these ultimate goals, God himself, there is no compromise. There can be no compromise to the degree that I will accept a scale or values in which God is not present.
As long as the strategy doesn't depart from those values either, though.
The strategy should be consistent with the goals, obviously. It should derive from the goals, or else the strategy, the tactics, ruin the goals.
In other words, we don't want to say always that the ends justify the means.
Tut, tut.
Obviously not. This is the old question. The means determine the ends far more often than the reverse being the case.
Now, in the case of these two men, because I think this problem that we've just viewed now is a fairly common one. They really had an interest in common. Now, What is the drive that makes them arrive at a compromise, that is, a surrender? It's not the discovery of a common interest. This they have. And they are honest people. The man who is the researcher or the inventor, and the man who is the salesman, and even the man who is, in a way, the mediator. What force comes in there to make them accept the compromise?
I think that before there can be any compromise, there must be some understanding of the person who holds the opposite position. One of the things that happens so frequently that prevents compromise is that one tends to assail the person holding the opposite point of view on the grounds of motives. He stops dealing with the ideas he proposes and assumes rather that the person he is opposing has unworthy motives. There is no possibility of agreement or compromise as long as one is imputing motives. It is only when we, with empathy, enter into the other person's situation with respect, come to understand him, that there is the basis for a compromise. At the end of this particular drama that we saw, there was, again, some understanding of the merits and the values of each person.
Well, I feel that they had this more or less all the way along. The mediator mentioned back about halfway that he could see that harmony had been one of the things that played a big part in their success. I'm wondering if it is important for us to find out where these men got away from this harmony and what perhaps caused it. Would this be important in reaching a compromise?
A lot of times it might, but you can't always find out what is really wrong by going back through a chronological tracing of the situation, the history. It could be within a very short moment of history, a great number of things were compacted and occurred all at once. Probably what happened was that one or the other one ceased to value the particular contribution being made by the other person. And he tended, therefore, to minimize the contribution made by the other. He began to think in terms that were not sufficiently happy for the other one. And so there came this distrust, this tension of personalities, even before there was a tension of ideas.
Don't we live in a society, though, in which so much tends to create in us this distrust of other people's motives? Among your young students, don't you find this?
Yes, this is always an easy way to prove you're right, to say that the other person is operating out of motives that are impure or motives that are less worthy than mine. There is no way that one can rationally prove this or disprove it. It seems to me that any attempt to solve any kind of argument on this basis indicates that one has stopped thinking, that he's begun to resort to shortcuts in order to prove his position.
Isn't there too much selfishness also? This tendency to think that one is right, I am right and the other party is wrong. This tendency, isn't it a tremendous amount of selfishness?
Well, selfishness, you can express it even in, I think, words that are more apt. It's the failure of a person to remember that he is a person and not God. That as a person, he doesn't have the final answers. He only has approximations of the truth. But each one of us would like to play God to the extent that we are absolute. We've got the whole truth. We know. And so we set ourselves up as the authority. Well, now, this is not good for us. It's not good for the people who are around us. And they resent our trying to play God, just as we would resent someone else trying to play God. This is a big part of the problem, is that man is seeking to put himself in God's place and absolutize on things that he is not capable of absolutizing on.
But life every day demands decisions.
Surely it does.
Is this not one reason for which so many people are what we call politely mentally unhealthy? Because they are not equipped to make a decision. I'm not suggesting that they should think they're God, but I mean, is there not here a compromise to be found?
Well, Dr. Reinhold Niebuhr has pointed out that the Christian can never be sure that he's making the decision that God wants, but he's always under the imperative to make a decision as a response of love to God. This is the dilemma the Christian is always caught in, that he must make decisions before he has all the facts. He must commit his life to a pattern of action when he knows that history may prove him wrong in a short period of time because he doesn't have full knowledge. But on the other hand, he knows that if he loves God as well as he understands justice and love, he must act.
How do you know that you have God on your side? When people are so disturbed by a decision they have to make, they act and they think they're God.
The question itself, the way in which it is phrased, tends to indicate our self-centeredness. We're not really to ask whether God is on our side, but how can I get on God's side? How can I be God's creature rather than how can I use God for my own purposes? Now,
what's your answer?
The answer is that a man is under obligation to learn all he can about the way God has acted in history, even in the present moment, history in the present moment, that he is under the responsibility of listening to the voice of God as it speaks through revelation, as it speaks through history, as it speaks in the lives of fellow men. And even realizing that this is a partial answer, that he cannot see the whole truth, he must act on the basis of the best truth that he has.
And this comes around to having the courage to stand up for one's convictions. And I'm wondering if there is an area difference between standing up for one's convictions and just pure stubbornness.
Very definitely, I'd say that there is, although sometimes a person may stand up for his convictions and get involved in pure stubbornness along the way, just because he's a human being. A great deal of our difficulty is that we do not understand, we do not enter into the other man's life, we don't know what he's doing, and therefore we don't know how to tell him what we're standing for. This again is a problem of communications. In teaching young ministers, one of the things we try to do to get them to understand the layman is to do some role playing and ask the young minister to act as if he is the president of the bank who is opposing the minister's program because it'll cost too much money. After he has lived this kind of role for a short period of time, he begins to understand the attitude of the banker far better than he could otherwise. This is not something he reads in economics, but something that he lives as he tries to assume a role.
There seems to be quite a difference in the meaning put on the word compromise by the lawyer and the two partners. Did you get this idea that back in their minds they didn't just exactly agree with him on what compromise really meant, that he had a different idea of it altogether?
Yes, I think so. I could not help but sympathize with the two partners.
This discussion isn't finished until you have thought through to your satisfaction the questions which Miss Sergio, Mr. Emery, and Dr. Jackson have been considering. Perhaps you will want to continue to think and talk about the issues which Talkback is raising. Talkback is a public service program presented by this station and the churches of your community. It was produced in cooperation with the National Council of Churches as a contribution of the Methodist Television Ministry.